Hey white people, it's been a minute since I've done one of these videos, but as hopefully most of you know, we've had another murder here in Minneapolis. Amir Locke was killed about a week ago. He was asleep on his couch, or his cousin's couch, wrapped up in a blanket. The police came in. They didn't knock. They announced themselves as they walked into the apartment, stormed into the apartment. They got to where he was sleeping on the couch and he hadn't woken up yet, and so they kicked the couch and he fell off the couch onto the floor, and, startled himself awake. And he's a licensed gun owner, and so his gun was sitting right in front of him as he was sleeping, for safety. And as he fell and realized that there were people standing around him with guns and lights pointed in his face, screaming, he went for his gun and he had it in his hand. He had the barrel, or his fingers along the side of the barrel, not on the trigger. He was attempting to kind of see what was going on. Again, still wrapped in a blanket, barely awake. And they shot him because he had a gun in his hand. The time from the door to the gunshot was about 9 seconds. The time from when they kicked the couch to when they shot him was 2 seconds. So he was awake for 2 seconds. And one of the things that I have heard recently is just people talking about when you have a gun, one of the first things that they teach you is you assess the situation. So you put your fingers along the side of it, not on the trigger, so that you know what's going on before you make an action. And when you are a gun owner that keeps your gun by your bed, in case of home invasion, the first thing they say that you do when you're startled awake is that you secure your weapon so that it's not used against you. So Amir was awakened out of a dead sleep and went to secure his weapon and to check what was going on. And before he was even awake, think about 2 seconds. That was 2 seconds. That's how long he was awake. And in that time, he thought to secure his weapon. He thought to not put his fingers on the trigger. He knew what he was doing and he was being safe. Anyway, yesterday, Mayor Frey, who is the mayor of Minneapolis, gave a press conference. Well, not a press conference. He gave an interview to NPR News. And I was listening to him talk. He ran on a platform that said that he, in his last term, had banned no-knock warrants. And he obviously did not ban no-knock warrants because this was a no-knock warrant that they served on Amir Locke, and that's why he is dead. But he had it all over his campaign literature. He talked about it in his speeches. He had it on his website. And they were asking him about it, and he was like, well, it used to be that they didn't have just no-knock warrants. It was a no-knock warrant and a no-announce warrant are used interchangeably, so they don't actually have to knock and wait for people to come to the door. They have to announce themselves and why they're there before they cross the threshold, which, at least in this case, it was as they were storming into the apartment, they were yelling. There was not I stood outside your door and announced what I was doing and then I came in. That's not how that worked. It was like a flow of motion. They unlocked the door quietly with a key. They did not knock. And as they pushed in 4 of them into the room, they're all yelling. And uh, they were asking him about like why he lied, and he was like, well, I mean, all of this is really hard to explain, the difference between no knock and no announce, and so, sometimes brevity is the enemy of accuracy. So he was trying to say that he had to put something slogany on his website so he couldn't tell the big long story about how he didn't actually ban anything. He needed it to sound good. White people, this is what we do. He knew that he needed black people to vote for him in Minneapolis if he was going to win the mayorship. He knew that he had been the mayor during George Floyd's murder, and he knew what the people had demanded. They had demanded an end to no-knock warrants, and he knew exactly what that meant. They wanted police to knock at the door and wait for it to be opened before they go storming into an apartment. He knew that. And his brevity is the enemy of accuracy? No. Lying is the enemy of the truth. And he did it on purpose. He did it on purpose because he used black people to get into power. And because he did that, this young man is dead. Historically, that's what happens. White people use black people. They lie to them, they say the things that they need to say to get into power, and then they don't use that power to help black people. Black people continue to die, but the white guy got his power, so that's the goal. They asked him about the fact that the first reports coming out of the Minneapolis police were that Amir Locke was a suspect and that he had a gun. And the first pictures that they released were pictures of his gun, not of him or of the scene. They released pictures of his gun and called him a suspect. So that he wasn't a suspect. He wasn't a suspect at all. He was a kid sleeping on a couch at his cousin's house. His cousin wasn't a suspect. Now, there's a young man that's in custody right now who was his cousin, but it's a different cousin. So the young man that's in custody is 17, and he lives with his mom on the 14th floor of this building. The police were looking for him, so they issued a no-knock warrant for his house. They issued a no-knock warrant for his neighbor's house. These are apartments. And they issued a no-knock warrant for his brother's apartment. All of them served at, before 6 a.m. And all of them, the police coming in and waking people from their sleep and raiding the space. Now, maybe you want to go, the first kid is wanted for possible murder. So we want to whatever. I think no-knock warrants are not helpful no matter what. But maybe I give you there's a murder suspect. But the idea that you're going to raid somebody's brother's house, can you imagine if your brother did something and all of a sudden somebody's busting down your door at 6 a.m. and they shoot you? I mean, that's pretty much what happened. Amir Locke was in the apartment of the brother, sleeping on the couch, having no idea that any of this was going to happen. He doesn't know. He is literally not a part of any of this. And yet here he is with guns in his face at 6 a.m. and eventually he's dead. And when they asked Mayor Frey about the inaccuracy of him being called a suspect right away and him being his gun being the pictures that they released, again, Mayor Frey talked about how he understands how hurtful that is to the community and how damaging that can be. But sometimes there's a call for information really quick. And so we just have to put information out. And sometimes that's the enemy of accuracy. Except for that, no. you didn't accidentally put out that he was a suspect. You didn't accidentally put out pictures of his gun. Do you want to know why none of my white friends are posting about this? Why none of my white friends are sharing this anywhere? Why none of my white friends are upset the way they were after George Floyd was murdered? It's because every single one of them heard about it the first day and heard, oh, he had a gun. Oh, he was a suspect. Oh, he pointed a gun at police, which he did not ever point the gun at police. It was always pointed at the ground. But that first bit of messaging that the police put out shut down. It shut down the number of, especially white people, that would have given any craps about this thing. And they knew that. And they did it on purpose. And so if you're somebody who has just not really followed this, you're not really sure how you feel about it, just know that that's on purpose. We've been watching this series called Women of the Movement, and it talks about Emmett Till and his mom, Mamie. And you watch how they use the media against her. They tell stories about how awful her son was. They tell stories about how awful her son's father was. And that's pretty much all it takes to make it so that the white people don't help. So that his murderers don't get convicted. All it takes is a little itty bit of disparagement of the black person or of the black person's family. Even now, I know I saw a comment yesterday. Somebody was like, if Amir Locke's cousin hadn't been out killing people, then Amir Locke would be alive. It's not how any of this works. What part of the Constitution says if you commit a crime, your cousin can be shot in cold blood? Like, there is no punishment for any crime where they kill an innocent person that happens to be related to you. That's not how any of this works. But as white people, a lot of times we are okay with black death and black abuse and black murder. If somebody justifies to us why the white person that killed them had a right, or why that black person might have deserved it. That is the narrative all the time. It was the narrative for George Floyd. It was the narrative for Daunte Wright. It was the narrative for Emmett Till in the 1950s. This is a pattern. This is how it works. And we have to be smarter than to be tricked by that. The end of that show, you watch Mamie, the mom, on the floor just crying because not only did they murder her son, and she has to think about all of the ways that he died afraid and hurting, but then they murdered his legacy and they dragged him through the mud and they made it his fault. And the abuse upon abuse upon abuse that we put onto black people is unacceptable. Running for mayor, promising things that you know you haven't delivered to trick black people into voting for you is not acceptable. Putting out statements that call people suspects instead of victims is not acceptable. All of that is white supremacy. And it victimizes and then victimizes and then victimizes again until it's not just the man that you've shot in cold blood for no reason. It's the parents who have to not only mourn his death but defend his legacy. And then it's the community that has to stand in the freezing cold outside and defend their own right to exist, that their lives matter. We have to stop this white supremacy because black lives do matter and lies are lies.